the Volstead Act, which was the then law interpretation of the 18th Amendment, explicitly said that leaders of ecclesiastical areas, religious leaders governing a certain ecclesiastical area, can then give permission to the rabbis, priests, whoever it may be, of that area to produce and then sell wine. So for Christians, this was relatively straightforward because wine was used in church. And so, the bishop or archbishop or whoever it might be, and depending on the size of the town, would acquire wine from whatever Christian manufacturer presumably is making it, give it to the priests in the local area. The priests would keep it in the church and use it as appropriate. Of course, for Jews, it's not quite that simple. And the complexity comes on multiple levels. It comes, first of all, on the level of organization, which is the lack of organization of any sort of rabbinic institutions in the United States at that time. One may argue even at this time, but that's probably a good argument. But.
Yeah, I don't know that there's never been central. And even, maybe you can make an argument amongst certain denominations, they might be somewhat centralized, certainly in certain maybe geographical locales, but on the whole, definitely not. And Orthodox, I think, especially so. Like there's almost like I don't want to say anarchic, but like there's definitely, a lot of opinions, let's say.
Yes. There's certainly complexity when it comes to the Orthodox ecclesiastical hierarchy, let's say. Yeah. And it was even worse back then because, rabbis would come from Eastern Europe, Western Europe, wherever, let's say Eastern Europe. No one would know. They'd find themselves in some small town, announce their rabbi, be hired, and nobody knew. Nobody paid attention. And so to suggest that they knew where all the rabbis were was just impossible.
In the first 2 decades of the 20th century in America, where a lot of the debates was about how American it is to be temperate, to have no drinking whatsoever. And a lot of this, by the way, was driven by Protestant movements of a whole host of them in the 1860s, 70s, and so forth. A lot of them signed on, Methodists and so forth. But the Jews, by and large, did not ever sign on, ever. There might have been some Jews here and there that might have, said, oh, yeah, we should, go dry. But by and large, Jews definitely weren't. And a lot of this was also driven by religious rhetoric. A lot of the rabbis said, no, like this is important to us. But the tides really turned by the first 2 decades of the 20th century, in which it was anyway. So the Jews who were feeling kind of sort of a tenuous relationship in this country of like, how do they relate to themselves to the broader country and to their fellow countrymen? Like, is this almost like they don't want to be seditious or anything of that nature. So it was a real concern. And then by the time, as you mentioned, the 18th Amendment gets signed into legislation. So I think reform and conservative really sought to, they're more part of this country. Certainly identity wise, they felt that it's important. It's a value that they're part of it. And part of it was like, there are also 2-3 million Jews who came from Eastern Europe between 1880 and, around this time. So a lot of them don't have the American context. It's not important for them to be American. And they also have like their attitudes towards governmental agencies is not necessarily the most positive. So like, why should they want to try to be part of the reigning government? So they're like, well, this is important to me as a Jew. Like, this is, why are you trying to take away my ability to do Kiddush and offer these that's part of our identity as Jews. And so I think that's just a sense of complexity for context. Yeah.
And unfortunately, the Orthodox rabbinate did not distinguish itself throughout the Prohibition and the decade that it was actually the law of the United States.
Right. So that's all background context. Then what you're mentioning is this craziness, which like for Jews, it doesn't make sense. Like it's insane for anybody who knows how Jewish life works. Like, you're going to put this for rabbis? Like, rabbis are going to handle alcohol sales? Like, what? It's just asking for trouble. That's just asking for trouble. Nothing good can come of that.
Exactly right. And, the Chilul Hashem desecration of God's name, played itself out on papers, newspapers throughout the country, unfortunately.